Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari ISKCON Gurvinda Ki, Shri Prabhupada Ki, Kantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande. So all reading from Vilamrita. They've titled this one, Your Ever Well-Wisher. So this chapter is Let There Be a Temple Part 1. Prabhupada's dwelling was a simple thatched Bengali hut, about 12 feet square, with a dirt floor. A thin partition divided the main room from the servants' quarters. In front was a small veranda, and in back a garden, where Prabhupada could sit and take massage. Also in back were a hand pump for bathing and an outhouse. When the devotees apologized for offering Prabhupada such a humble residence, he replied that he liked the natural simplicity. Even if you build me the biggest palace, he said, still I would prefer to live here. And he did. And that is still there. While living so simply in Mayapur, Prabhupada spoke of his vision of a grand project yet to come. Although the deities of Radha Madhava were installed in a tent, he spoke of a marble palace. He also spoke of first-class accommodations for guests and devotees, although as yet he had little to offer. Living simply and happily in his thatched hut, he gathered his disciples together and told them of his plans. At his request, devotees had built a small model of the proposed first major building, and there were also drawings of the proposed Temple of Human Understanding. He wanted to build a Mayapur city, he said, with quarters for each of the 4 social classes of the Varnashram institution. The 5-day Gaur Purnima festival featured 24-hour kirtan, with groups of devotees chanting in 2-hour shifts. Each morning, the main body of devotees would form a kirtan procession and go out visiting Navadvip's holy sites. The neem tree under which Lord Chaitanya was born, the house of Srivas Thakur, where Lord Chaitanya and his associates had performed nocturnal kirtan, the spot where the Kazi tried to stop Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan, the residence of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Often Bhaktivinoda Thakur had stood in front of this house, Prabhupada told the disciples, and looked out across the Jalangi. Jalangi is a river, in case you didn't know, toward where Srila Prabhupada now had his land. And this is where Bhaktivinoda Thakur had made a prophetic statement that there would be a temple would rise there, and devotees from all over the world would come and chant. And such, by the desire of the Lord, then this came to pass. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6. Chapter 14, entitled King Chitraketu's Lamentation, text 30. Sapi tat prashanad eva. Sapi tat prashanad eva. Actually, let's see. Yeah, there's no Shishikon Tamapashashki. So there's a few verses before there's a purport. I'll just do these ones myself, and then we can do the verse which has the purport. So starting from text 30. As Kritika Devi, after receiving the semen of Lord Shiva from Agni, conceived a child named Skanda Kartikeya, Kritadyuti, having received semen from Chitraketu, became pregnant after eating remnants of food from the yajna performed by Angira. Text 31. After receiving semen from Maharaj Chitraketu, the king of Shurasena, the queen Kritadyuti gradually developed in her pregnancy. O King Parikshit, just as the moon develops during the bright fortnight. 32. Thereafter, in due course of time, a son was born to the king. Hearing news of this, all the inhabitants of the state of Surasena were extremely pleased. 33. King Chitraketu was especially pleased. After purifying himself by bathing and by decorating himself with ornaments, he engaged learned Brahmins in offering benedictions to the child and performing the birth ceremony. 4. Unto the Brahmins who took part in the ritualistic ceremony, the king gave charity of gold, silver, garments, ornaments, villages, horses, and elephants, as well as 60 crores of cows, 600 million cows. And text 35. As a cloud indiscriminately pours water on the earth, the beneficent King Chitraketu, to increase the reputation, opulence, and longevity of his son, distributed like rainfall all desirable things to everyone. 36. When a poor man gets some money after great difficulty, his affection for the money increases daily. Similarly, when King Chitraketu, after great difficulty, received a son, his affection for the son increased day by day. 37. The mother's attraction and attention to the son, like that of the child's father, excessively increased. The other wives, seeing Kritaduti's son, were very much agitated, as if by high fevers, with the desire to have sons. 38. As King Chitraketu fostered his son very carefully, his affection for Queen Kritaduti increased, but gradually he lost affection for the other wives who had no sons. And 39. The other queens were extremely unhappy due to them being sonless because of the king's negligence towards them. They condemned themselves in envy and lamented. Do this verse, text 40. Dig aprajam striyam papam patyush chakriha samatam. Sorry, I should have done that line. Dig aprajam striyam papam patyush chagra samatam suprajabi sapatnibir suprajabi sapatnibir dasim eva tirashkritam dasim eva tirashkritam. A wife who has no, sorry, skip that there. Back to the start. Dig aprajam striyam papam patyush chagri sama patyush chagriha patyush chagriha samatam suprajabi sapatnibir dasim eva tiraskritam dig aprajam striyam papam patyush chagriha samatam suprajabir sapatnaibir dasim eva tiraskritam diga prajam striyam papam patyush chagriha samatam suprajabir sapatnibir dasim eva tiraskritam. Please chant. Dik, all condemnation. Rajam, without a son. Striyam, upon a woman. Papam, full of sinful activities. Patyu, by the husband. Cha, also. Agriha samatam, who is not honored at home. Su prajabi, who have sons. Sapatnibi, by co-wives. Dasim, a maidservant. Riva, exactly like. Tiraskritam, dishonored. Translation: a wife who has no sons is neglected at home by her husband and dishonored by her co-wives, exactly like a maidservant. Certainly such a woman is condemned in every respect because of her sinful life. Please repeat. A wife who has no sons is neglected at home by her husband and dishonored by her co-wives, exactly like a maidservant. Certainly such a woman is condemned in every respect because of her sinful life. Srila Prabhupada's purport, as stated by Chanakya Pandit, Yasha grihe nasti bharya cha priya vadini aranyam tena gantavyam yataran yam tatagriham. A person who has no mother at home and whose wife does not speak sweetly should go to the forest. For such a person, living at home and living in the forest are equal. Similarly, for a woman who has no son, who is not cared for by her husband, and whose co-wives neglect her, treating her like a maidservant, to go to the forest is better than to remain at home. Om Agana Tamarandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chatrunma Tamina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Kam Karoti Vachalam Pavanagari Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Ram, Hare. A wife who has no sons is neglected at home by her husband and dishonored by her co-wives, exactly like a maidservant. Certainly such a woman is condemned in every respect because of her sinful life. So according to this chapter, this pastime here with King Chitraketu, then one of his main anxieties was that he had no issue, he had no son, which was an issue. He had no issue, which became an issue, because in the Varnashram system, the son or sons are supposed to perform oblations, they carry on the lineage of the family, and they're supposed to liberate the ancestors. So it's considered that after death, then the ancestors go to which planet? Which is the planet of the trees, is that right? Oh, there was some, that's what it said in the very first version of Bhagavad Gita. Actually, when Srila Prabhupada, just been a bit humorous there, Pitri Loka, when Prabhupada first came to America, he had dictated into his dictaphone translations of Bhagavad Gita. He actually had written a manuscript for Bhagavad Gita, but unfortunately the place he was staying in, the typewriter and the manuscript got stolen. And what did Prabhupada do? He started again. Now, if we had written a whole book, would you think to start again? Unlikely. But such determination. And this is, when you hear this, you think, oh, I'd like to get a hold of that guy who stole that typewriter or something. But Prabhupada, what did he think? He just stayed determined to his spiritual master's instruction. And sometimes that happens. We may come across some hurdle. And initially, the natural reaction is it would become despondent or morose. But then We remember the mission which is given by your spiritual master, which is what Srila Prabhupada did, and then we just fix our mind back on that mission, pick ourselves up and carry on again. So this is the thing, we have to, it's important that our life is aligned with the words of the spiritual master, that he is authorizing us. And in this way, we carry on with the path. If we happen to come across some obstacles in the path, then we simply get back on the path again. Now, of course, Srila Prabhupada had great cause for despondency. He knew time was short, so immediately he started again. So he dictated part of the Gita, and when in those days Prabhupada's accent was a lot more thick, as you would say, so devotees didn't quite understand him. And one of the persons who was transcribing Srila Prabhupada's words wasn't even a devotee. He was staying at the temple for summer holidays, and because he had some education in that respect, then he was engaged by the devotees, as we do, just like here in Krishna. We engage so many visitors and volunteers in some service for their benefit, and they may not even understand, the service they're doing. They might just see it's like cleaning the temple room or picking flowers, but we connect it with Krishna's service for their benefit. So this person was being engaged for his benefit, but he didn't understand. So when the Prabhupada talked about the planet of the pit trees, and it was understood by this person, it was planet of the trees. So I'm just going into this because also I just want to say that when I first read the Bhagavad Gita, I took Prabhupada's word. He said that you should scrutinizingly study these scriptures. So I was scrutinizingly studying them, reading the transliteration, then the word for word, and then the translation. And when I seen the word Pitri, Loka, planet of the forefathers, and then I seen how it was translated, then I thought that doesn't make sense. And then when the second edition of Bhagavad Gita came out, or the devotees has actually become more familiar with Prabhupada's accent, had re-listened to the tapes and made it closer to what actually Prabhupada said, had made it accurate to what Prabhupada says. Then the first verse I went to when that book came out was that verse, and I seen planet of the Pitris, Pitri Loka, the forefathers, and I thought, yes, I can have faith in this. So because this is closer to what he says. So this is the thing, is sometimes we may become distracted. We have to maybe, even then, Prabhupada allowed it to go on, make the best use of a bad bargain. Anyway, the point I was going to make is that King Chitraketu, he had nobody to look after him and the forefathers. So the pit trees, or the forefathers, were going to be neglected. So this is considered to be a condemned situation if the forefathers are not being looked after. So this is according, of course, to the Varnashram system. Now devotees, they're in a different category because they're surrendered to the Lord and they have the Lord's protection directly. Therefore, all other types of dharma, sarva dharma prityaja, mamikam sharanam braja, amtvam sarva papebhyo moksheshamimassuchaha. As long as we surrender to the Lord, surrender to the representative of the Lord, the spiritual master, then we're protected. When we step outside of that, then we're once again under if we give up the shelter of the Supreme Lord, give up the shelter of the spiritual master, then we're under no longer under his protection or the protection of the Lord, but we come under the influence of Maya, the material energy. So this is why Krishna says, Daivahesha gunamayi mama maya duratyaya. This divine energy of mine, known as Maya, is very difficult to overcome, but those who surrender unto me can easily cross beyond it. So, of course, we know that surrendering to Krishna means surrendering to Guru, because Guru is a representative of Krishna. And he says, one who says he is my devotee is not my devotee, but one who says he's a devotee of my devotee is actually my devotee. So this is Krishna's words, and therefore, if we want that protection which Krishna is giving, then we have to adhere to his directions. It's just like if it's not such a problem here, But in America, you can get done for jaywalking, which means if you don't cross a designated crossing point, then you get yourself in trouble. So if you're new to the country, then you go up to someone who's an authority and they say, yeah, you can go over there and cross at that point. But if someone who's not authority, or you decide to cross any old place you like yourself, then immediately you can get yourself in trouble. And even if you don't know the law, still there's trouble there, isn't there? So if you're a tourist and you jaywalk in America, I don't know, they may be lenient, but the law is the law. So when we come under the effect of Maya, then the law is the law. But when we are under the direction of the spiritual master, he directs us where we should cross, where we shouldn't cross. In this way, we remain connected, we remain protected. So, although here in the Varnashram system it's considered to be inauspicious because the forefathers are not getting the necessary offerings to relieve them of whatever sins they may have accumulated in their lifetime, it's a bit akin to this Catholic conception of purgatory. So in the Catholic tradition, they have basically a conception of heaven and hell and purgatory. Purgatory is a place in between where you can be purified of your sins and then go further up, and it takes some time. So this is also similar kind of thing that, and I remember also being brought up as a Catholic, then people would pray for their relatives, and they would have a day called All Souls Day, which meant that anybody who never had anybody praying for them, then everybody would pray for them, which is quite a kind, compassionate concept, really, isn't it? The people we don't even know for, we're praying for them, remaining a well-wisher for strangers who may be in a situation which is a bit tentative or undecided. So similarly here, they were concerned, very much concerned, for himself, for the forefathers. And we see this in many different cultures. In Africa, they're very much the culture of the ancestors. That's very much in their understanding of their religious principles. Of course, we have to be careful because sometimes superstitions can creep in, and superstition doesn't necessarily mean to say that it's a fact. Therefore, for us, attempting to be devotees of Krishna, following the footsteps of Guru and Gauranga, trying to be followers of Srila Rupa Goswami. And it's important that we follow in their footsteps and follow closely the instructions they give us, so that we are afforded the benefits, the benedictions, the protection, and the destinations which they are offering. So therefore, it's very important that we stick to the basics of our Krishna consciousness. I've often found that when things get confusing or things become troublesome, then to refocus on the very foundational principles of our Krishna consciousness helps us to realign ourselves or remain aligned. Because if we forget the basics, then calamity can be there no matter how much we think. And there was occasions, we read in Srila Prabhupada's various Leela Amritas that sometimes devotees got ahead of themselves. And they would even come to the point where they would criticize Srila Prabhupada. And then he would say, now they have become too intelligent, become so intelligent. And then because of that, then if they weren't careful, they would lose that good grace that Srila Prabhupada afforded them. There was a story of two sannyasis who, in their previous life, look, there's this saying, every saint had a past and every sinner has a future. So these two devotees, and they were devotees at that time, or had become devotees, I should say, and they had a past which was certainly very shady, akin to, well, they were actually gangsters, and they had done many things which they weren't very proud of. And as they were revisiting India, they got their fortune told by one Jyoti. Sometimes you get these persons who are not just astrologers, but the Bhrigu Samhita, and basically some of these guys, they walk into the room and they can tell you who you are, and they can tell where you're from, they can tell you your life story simply because they know how to read the Bhrigu Samhita, which it can indicate each individual person and their history, etc. So don't ask me how they do it. But I have heard some devotees who went there and they were astounded by these persons who can actually do that. So anyway, they had came across such a person, and the person looked at their forehead, looked at their hands, looked at their face, the art of physiognomy, where you can tell someone's character by their face. And he says, actually, according to all signs, then you should be dead by now, according to what you've done in this lifetime. And he says, but there's someone very powerful in your life which is holding this back. And then they showed a picture of Srila Prabhupada in one of his books, and he says, yes, this is a person, whatever you do not give up this person's shelter, or your life will catch up with you. And sometimes that's what happens. I remember when I first started visiting the temple back in 83, then I felt a great shelter there. And then I would stay for about 2 weeks, and then I'd drive back to Scotland. It was Chaitanya College back in Worcestershire, down there. But as soon as I drove out of the place, then I felt very vulnerable. So I was just chanting constantly the whole drive all the way back up, just chanting. And I couldn't wait to go back. I had just finished my 4-year apprenticeship, finished college and finished my work. And there's what you call in-between jobs. So I was signing on, and what I was doing is I'd go back to sign on, and then I'd go down as soon as I could, back down to the temple again. And my meditation, as long as I was out of the temple, was just to simply get back there. And so that was just my connection, was to remain mentally connected. But physically being there was a great shelter for me. Of course, in due course of time, we began to understand the practice of Krishna consciousness, and the Vani is more important than Vapu, etc. So many devotees who live outside the temple, it's not that necessarily they all have to move in, just in case you're all wondering. And of course, you may be very much aware of the vulnerability of being in the material world, and that can serve as an impetus for taking shelter in Krishna and taking seriously the time we have. We have limited time as householders living outside the temple. Sometimes we just have limited time for our sadhana in the morning or in the evening, or squeeze in a bit at lunchtime. So we try to make the most of that, so we can really make a strong connection with Krishna. So the important thing is that we have to remain connected strongly through the holy name, through hearing the Shastras, through some kind of service, through only taking Krishna Prasadam, so that we're not eating foodstuff contaminated by people with materialistic desires. And as much as possible, we, in every aspect of our life, we try to remain aligned with the instruction of the spiritual master. In this way, we can actually be feeling safe, whether we were living in a temple, or whether we're living in the North Pole, or whether we're in the middle of a jungle, or whether we're in the middle of a Kali Yuga city, which is like another type of jungle. So materially, here this verse was quoted by Chanakya Pandit, that a person who has no mother at home, a wife who doesn't speak sweetly, etc. And there's other ones that says that a son who answers back, things like that. These things are condemned things. It means that one should just leave home. One shouldn't waste time with living with such personalities. Or if we have no mother at home, we have not a wife who speaks sweetly, or we have no issue, we have no progeny to continue. So for a devotee, that is not so important, because Krishna becomes He's the one who directs our future. He's the one who our destiny is in his hands. So just like in the Nectar of Devotion, Srila Bhakti states that when one chants and dances in front of the deity and claps one's hands, then the birds of sinful activity fly far away, and the lines on our hand change. Now, of course, it's not necessarily means that by the lines on our hand, that means our destiny, right? Generally, people want to tell your destiny. They look at your palm and they say, okay, you've got a long lifeline, but you might have a few things going on here. It looks like you have 2, 3 kids. And so those lines are actually a science there. Not sure how exactly it is in Kali Yuga, of course, but the thing is that by chanting and dancing in front of the deities and clapping their hands, it's not that we'll clap the hands and then look, see, okay, that one was there previously, now it's moved here, or it's got a bit longer, okay, keep chanting, keep clapping. It's figuratively, but it's also factually, that by doing this, we're purifying our heart of the karmic activity that we've accumulated, which is previously was our destiny that had been marked out for us. As Sri Prahlad says, that the happiness and distress in this lifetime is already chalked out for us by our activities and our choices in a previous life. And of course, once again, how we react according to those karmic reactions, that will determine the future. So as a devotee, then our thing is to carry on with devotional service regardless of what comes our way, happiness or distress, because that is simply some temporary reaction, just like the winter and summer seasons. And by engaging in this chanting and dancing in front of the deity and in devotional service, any of these different processes of devotional service, we're purifying our heart and mind. And what was once our destiny is no longer our destiny. It's changed. I sometimes think back to a friend before I joined. There was quite a group of us who had came across Prabhupada's books, and one by one we started joining. And some of them were very much interested, but of course they were a bit too attached. Although they did come to visit the temple, and there was one boy who came to visit us at the manor. He came to visit the temple, and although he liked it, he kind of whimsically just says, I'm not going to do it, I'm just going to stay out here in Maya. And it was only a few weeks later he was involved in a very serious motorbike accident. He was paralysed from the neck down. And I couldn't help thinking if he'd have just joined when he was planning to join, that wouldn't have happened, because he wouldn't have had his motorbike for a start. And it became impetus for me. Is like, okay, no matter what happens, don't leave the shelter of Krishna consciousness. And I don't know what became of him, but of course his friends went to visit him in hospital, and they thought they were doing him a favour by bringing him in intoxicants and things like that, sneaking him in things that shouldn't have been there. So in their mind, they're thinking they've been charitable, but actually all they're doing is in the mode of ignorance. So for devotee women who have no son, who are not cared for by their husband doesn't is neither Krishna conscious or who directs them wrongly, then they said it's better they go to the forest than to remain at home. So this going to the forest, it's symbolic of renouncing that situation. So, of course, renunciation in the mode of passion just because something's troublesome. But women don't have to feel unprotected if they find themselves in this situation, because they have Guru, they have Krishna, and this is where the shelter is going. As long as the husband is directing towards taking shelter of Guru and Krishna, then that person is in good standing. And if they're not, then the person has the freedom to think for themselves. Of course, the Krishna conscious movement is not set up to split up couples from each other, and sometimes even, one devotee who's a long time steady devotee serving as a temple president, and his wife is not and has never been interested in Krishna consciousness. But somehow or another, he manages to do that service because the paths don't interfere with each other. So when Krishna talks about Sarvadharma Parityaja, he's making it available for all conditioned souls to take shelter of him through this process of evam parampara praptam. And regardless of whatever material dharmas they may think they have, then Krishna affords protection by coming to him directly. Directly, of course, means through that process the medium which he set up. So I think I can stop there. I don't want to get any comments or questions. Raghunath and Hokshaja.
Speaking about the lines on the hand, it's interesting that when Pradyumna Prabhu went for visa, he couldn't get, the lines. They couldn't take his fingerprints because they were so smooth, almost not there. All the lines were practically gone, so he wasn't sure, and even the authorities wasn't sure whether the UK government, because it's like a third party, whether UK government will allow. Because they were so barely visible. And he's like 67 years old. He's been clapping hands for a good, 40 years.
Wow. That means his future is eternal, full of bliss and full of knowledge. No karmic reaction. Amazing. It reminds me of George Harrison. When he first got his beads, they were all knobbly, but he chanted on them so much they became really smooth. So this is good. So much devotion service, or so much chanting, that our future is clear. Back to Godhead. Hoksha, you had a question or a comment?
It was just, I suppose it's a comment really. I've just been reading in the Mahabharata that Maharaj Yudhisthira was very traumatized by the whole battle that took place, and nobody could placate him. Everyone tried. So then Krishna said, why don't you approach Bhishma Dev? So the very first thing Bhishma Dev explained to him, because Yudhisthira was asking, how this must be all my fault. And and Bhishma Dev said, there's two things. There's destiny and there's exertion. He says, but destiny is also created by exertion. So ultimately everything is based on exertion. So you may have some residual karma left from a previous life, and that's now going to dictate, the type of body and mindset that you have. But with exertion, you could transcend, override particular limitations if the desire was intense enough. Exertion. That's when you exert yourself, like when you make an endeavor. If you make a lot of exertion, like with I was thinking of Dhruva Maharaj. It's referred to as Tivrena. His desire was so intense, even though it was a material desire, it was intense enough to invoke darshan of the Lord. And of course, once he got darshan, then everything was purified.
Yeah, and even a simple example of that could be, let's say someone wants to get married, and they think, well, if it's my destiny, I'll get married. I'll just stay in this room until somebody comes tapping on the door, till my destiny comes knocking. You're never going to meet anyone. So you have to at least get out of the room and go and try to meet somebody. Yeah, and also there's this analogy of the person who falls down the well, then they can be saved, but they have to at least stretch out their arms and grab the rope. They have to make some kind of endeavor and hold on to that rope, and then the person who's trying to save them will pull them up.
when he was praying to God, and a helicopter came over. And he said, "It's okay, God's going to save me." And then a ship came over, and he said, "It's okay, God's going to save me." And then eventually he drowned, and he went back to heaven. And he said, "Why didn't you save me?" And he said, and God said, "Well, I tried twice, and then I just gave up."
What he said he sent a helicopter and then he sent a ship.
He had he was like so fixed on how he thought God was going to help him, rather than being open to whatever way, seeing whatever way that the help comes that's been sent by God.
Yeah, and that's it's a very important point. Sometimes we're praying to the Lord for something, but it's so narrow, it's so specific that it doesn't allow the Lord to actually tell us what is the solution and what is the best thing. But you're praying sincerely and intently, but it's this thing and it has to be this thing. And then this is actually coming up also in the next purport, where people become inimical towards God and towards spiritual master or devotees because their prayers aren't answered in the way that they think they should be. Or they don't see the bigger picture. They are, willingly blending themselves to the bigger picture. Ashish, Prabhu, your hand up.
Yeah. Maybe a question on these lines only. So, is it what is materially bound to happen? Like the story you were saying about your friend, was he bound to, destined to go through this accident?
Was he bound to? Well, it was obviously what happened to him because it was his reaction for something somewhere in the past. Who can say what? And this is also covered in the next purport. We'll come across that soon. But just giving the previous example of the two gangsters whose destiny had been changed by taking shelter of the Guru, who had taken their karma, who was giving them shelter. So I think one can safely assume that there's a very good chance if that person had taken shelter, then that destiny would not have caught him. If he'd been in Harinam Sankirtan, he may have just got a token reaction. Someone may have run into him with a shopping trolley or something. And this is there also in Shastra. When the devotee takes initiation, the spiritual master very kindly takes his sinful reactions so that we don't have to suffer so much, so we can make advancement. So therefore, it's... but if one gives up the shelter of the spiritual master, then sinful reactions come upon them.
That's interesting as well. Shiva Ramoj was discussing this point in his book about Diksha Guru, that sometimes there's an overemphasis on the Diksha Guru. He's going to save me, he'll take my karma. And we undermine the position of the Shiksha Guru, because if we get Shiksha from the Diksha Guru, then that's good, but it's really the Shiksha that's going to save us more than anything else. Our ability to implement the instructions, and to have somebody in our life that we have such an open relationship with, that we can completely open our heart to them and they can give us direction, and we have full accountability to them.
Yeah, with regards to both Shiksha and Diksha, then Srila Prabhupada, he was once actually, he was commenting on some inauthentic Christians who were saying, well, Jesus died for my sins, so I don't have to bother giving up my sins. And Prabhupada actually shed a tear. He says, Jesus Christ is kindly dying for their sins, but they're still crucifying him because they can't continue sinning. He says, this is the spiritual master. This is the duty of the disciples to, once taken those vows, then don't continue sinning. Don't continue being a burden on the spiritual master. Use him like a doormat. This is not sincere. And with regards to Shiksha, then, according to Narahari Sarkar Thakur in the Krishna Bhajanamrita, he says that when one takes instruction from another person, even if you've been given permission by your Diksha Guru to get Shiksha from this person, you have to take it back to your Diksha Guru and ask him, is it okay to follow this instruction? So So in this way, because the Diksha Guru he's the one who's taking responsibility for you, so then he has to know that the Shiksha you've been given by someone else, even if they've been approved, then you have to take it back and say, no, is it okay that I follow this instruction? Because if the spiritual master is saying one thing, but someone else directs us in such a way the spiritual master wouldn't be pleased, then this is, it's not according to Shastra. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's true. I mean, some people have taken some rare statements from Srila Prabhupada and tried to make like a general thing and take it out of context. You know, so Prabhupada may say 10 things about something, and once he says something which appears to contradict it. So certainly we have to be very careful in terms of the letters. We have to try to understand the context. And that's why the spiritual master has to be consulted if we to see if we've understood the context properly. And in this way, he can give us a proper direction.
So, seeing this text translation in purport, how say relevant it is in today's society?
I would say today's society is very much topsy-turvy. So if this was the case, then pretty much nobody's got much of a chance. So therefore, in Kali Yuga, the Sankirtan Yoga is the only hope for people. Harinam, Harinam, Harinam eva kevalam, Kalo Nishjiva, Nishjiva, Nishjiva Gatiranyata. Now, certainly there are some remnants of Vedic civilization there, but even amongst some of the most pious persons who are trying to follow that, then there can be much confusion. So therefore, we just once again bring it back to Srila Prabhupada's books, or the law books for the next 10,000 years. And the main purpose of these books is to convince us to engage in the Yuga Dharma, chanting the holy name of the Lord. So by the chant of the holy name of the Lord, by engaging in service of the Lord, etc., then that connection with Krishna, because he's all auspicious, then pure devotional service is the beginning of all auspiciousness. So our endeavour is to follow in the footsteps of the previous acharyas. If we're trying to live according to Varnashram Dharma, the whole society does not support this nowadays. Even in India, which has the best chance of seeing any remnants of it, there's so much confusion as to how that could be practiced in the day and age. Sometimes they have high hopes for politicians. You know, people looking back to Ram Raj, right? Is it Ram Raj, is that what they call it? Ram Raj, which means the leadership and the kingdom of Lord Ram. They dream of that again. But if you ask them, okay, well, if that's the case, then everybody has to be like this and like this, and we have to organize ourselves into the proper categories according to guna and karma. Then people become so attached that they may not do that. And also their understanding of what that may be. And that was performed, you know, what was going on in a previous age was then. So we're talking about Treta Yuga, but we're now in Kali Yuga. Yuga Dharma is something different. So if you want to follow Ram Raj, then it's Harinam eva kevalam. That's Ram Raj. That's the new kingdom. Because in Kali Yuga, it's mentioned in the later cantos, I think it's 11th, maybe 12th, that in Kali Yuga, even great souls are bewildered. So what to speak of mere mortals like ourselves? So it's not unusual that bewilderment is there. Even amongst great personalities, they can disagree with each other. But one who takes to the chanting of the holy name of the Lord, then they get the shelter, the Namashraya, they get the shelter of the holy name. And to get that shelter of the holy name, we have to have the shelter of the spiritual master. We have to have the blessings of the devotees. Like that. Is that okay?
And it's fully their fault. It's like, you know, you can't blame anyone else. You just gotta. They're thoroughly condemned in every respect because of their sinful life. So that doesn't really go down so well, does it, in today's society? Because everyone's trying to blame somebody for their problems rather than, okay, well, this is my lot. So obviously they wouldn't have appreciated that. I mean, that's the comment from the Bhagavatam, but that wouldn't have gone down too well, would it, if he'd have said that to them?
Even in those days.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't a very happy lifestyle for them. But then even sometimes, because we see, like Dhruva Maharaj was the son of a maidservant. So sometimes the maidservant would have the children of the king because the queen couldn't. And then there could be, it's like, forget her name, but the queen who criticized Dhruva Maharaj, she didn't appreciate that he was also the progeny of the king. Yeah, so certainly it was a different type of society there with so many different understandings and rules. In previous ages, if you thought something wrong, you got the reaction for it. So that's pretty heavy. Now just imagine, what would be in Kali Yuga. In Kali Yuga, you don't have that. But at the same time, you have to be careful. So we shouldn't just think, oh, well, if I think wrong, I won't get a reaction. Kali Yuga, so I can think whatever I like. Because what will happen is that thinking, feeling, and willingness is a process. When we think about something, we start to feel like we want to do something about it. And then when we're willing to do it, we do it. So even though when we think something wrong, we shouldn't be purposefully thinking something wrong. We should try to purposely correct our thinking.
Talking about how when Krishna was on the planet, then women who would, if Krishna hadn't been on the planet at that time, or if they hadn't been devotees of Krishna, then they would have been, like you could say, exploited by their husbands or by men in general. And two of those women, one of them was Rukmini, who didn't want to be like put in a situation where she was going to be married to someone who was like, who wouldn't respect her devotion to Krishna. So the only person she could marry was Krishna. And also the wives of the proud Vedic Brahmanas. So in one sense, they kind of disobeyed the orders. They didn't disobey their husbands, but in the sense that their husbands wouldn't give anything to Krishna and Balaram, or when Krishna and Balaram sent the cowherd boys to beg some food from the Brahmins. But then when Krishna sent
What's
them
the
back,
question, please?
it's not a question, it's just a comment. The comment is that that just as the holy name enables us to all be on the same platform in relationship to Krishna, whether we're men or women, so similarly, devotion to Krishna in any age, if a woman has, even if a woman is like being born into a family where she's disrespected because of her karma, then still she had an opportunity to be a devotee of Krishna. If she was actually a devotee of Krishna, then Krishna would have made some arrangements by which her devotion could be proven to be superior to the like the material arrangements.
Yeah, that's the case. And we see that many of those personalities were devotees in previous lives, and they'd taken birth in certain circumstances. And often the Lord will put his devotees in positions to glorify them. But certainly if one wants to be a devotee of Krishna, then, and we see that in the topmost example of the gopis, that all types of material and social customs, they had sacrificed them for devotion to Krishna. That was like the topmost example of that. But also even much later was this devotee called Mirabai. She's not necessarily in our parampara, but she was a princess, I believe, and she was married to a prince, and somehow or another, I can't remember the whole story, I won't get into it, but she basically just wanted to be completely devoted to Krishna. So Krishna's in the heart of the living entity, and even if someone is in an unfavorable situation, if they desire to be a devotee of Krishna, then Krishna will give te sham satata yuktanam bhajatam pratipurvakam. He'll give the understanding by which they can come to him. Okay, Iskon Guru ki, Shri Prabhupada ki, Kantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande. Gaura Bhaktivinda ki.